Hello and good evening. Welcome to Ending Well with Minnelle. My name is Minnelle Williams. I'm the pre-planning funeral director at the New Haven Funeral Center and end of life help end of life expert helping you understand ending well. Tonight we are going to have a very special episode. I'm very excited to have it. I will be joined by a few fathers for our Father's Day episode, and we'll be speaking about estate planning, death, legacy, and how men deal with these conversations. So, without further ado, let us begin and start the conversation. So, tonight I have joining me, I have John Mills. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I have oh no, Opoku-Fofie. So sorry. I hate that I did that. All right. I practiced beforehand still. Alas. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome to the live.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So let me get you to start off by just introducing yourself so people know who you are. And while you're doing your intro, if you can please tell us if your funeral was today, what's one thing you'd want? Because this is an end of life conversation, so we're going to start right off with it. If your funeral was today, what's one thing you'd want us to know? Anybody can start.
Go ahead first, John.
Oh, as been said, my name is John Mills, member of the African Canadian community, and more specifically, Antigua and Barbuda community. I am retired now for 5 years, and I made a living in the auto industry, working with Bosch Automotive Service Solutions. Most of you would probably know Bosch in the what you might call appliance industry, but Bosch made its money from the automotive industry. So basically, that's that. I have fun by playing the guitar with a bunch of guys, and also I do a fair bit of gardening. So that's me in a nutshell. Got children and grandchildren.
Okay. Hello. My the government name, the given name by my father is Kwabena Opoku-Fofie, Ghanaian heritage. But on social media, I'm known as Sunset Nana. I am a former personal trainer. I'm a bunch of different things, but what I do right now is I host events. I actually specifically host a podcast called Love Thy Beard. It's a podcast and podcast street interviews IG Live, and I host an event called Champagne and Game, which is basically video games, social games in a partying environment. And to answer your question, Minnelle, one thing I would want people to remember me for if I was to pass right now is I would want people to remember me for my creativity. Um, you I want to leave the mark I want to leave on the world is I want people to be happy when they if they've ever came to one of my events or anything like that, right? So I want to leave my creativity with them.
Thank you. Absolutely. Creativity is a good mark to leave. John, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't answer the second part of the
That's
question,
okay.
but if I could speak to people while I'm lying in the box, I would say to them, listen, guys, have a wonderful time. Let's have fun celebrating my
Mm-hmm.
life, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
what I would say. But I would also say to them, if I were to able to speak to them, is like, if you only had 7 days to live
Mm.
and you are of sound mind at the time, what would you do within those 7 days
Yeah.
if you have 7 days to live and you are of sound mind? Example, where are the important documents, etc., etc. So that's what I would say to people.
Oh, oh, I didn't even think about it that way. I like that. That you're saying if you're of sound mind and you have 7 days left to live, how will you prepare? That's better than what I was thinking. I was thinking if I have 7 days left to live and I'm in sound mind, how am I going to enjoy myself? So I, in
That's
light of
good.
what we're talking about, I like what you said better, less. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So let's get into, first of all, why are you, if I can ask, just for my curiosity here, why are you here tonight? We're talking about death. We're talking about legacy. This is something that most people want to shy away from and be as far away from as they possibly can. So, why have you decided to join this live? Ned, I guess I'll start with you.
Okay, well, for me, there's a whole host of reasons. Where do I begin? I have my daughter, and I do want more children in the future. And one of the main things I've noticed, um, especially within our community, um, so for example, a couple weeks ago, an acquaintance of mine passed away, and they did a GoFundMe, right? And I've noticed that trend in our community a lot. And I'm not saying everybody does it, but the GoFundMes, right? Um, and especially now with what's going on with the economy and the cost of living going up so high. I'm seeing one of my coworkers, for example. I think she's 24. She recently purchased a home in this climate. And when I was talking to her, long story short, she said she got an inheritance from her father. I think it was like $1 million or something, right? So I say all that to say, why I'm a part of this live is I'm really big on leaving something behind for my children, right? Especially in our community, a lot of these things we ain't taught. Where I grew up in the Jane and Finch area, and they don't teach you these things at all, right? But getting older, um, becoming part of different groups, different communities, and seeing how they operate, and seeing how they're not thinking for the moment, but they're thinking 100 years down the line. That's where I want to be. That's where I'm going to be. So I'm putting things in place now to make sure that my children, when I'm not here, that my children won't have to do a GoFundMe. Their education's paid off. If they want to start a business, the money's there. Things like that. So that's why I'm in this live today.
That's key. That's exactly where I'm coming from. That's exactly the goal for us. That's the goal for us as community, that we're leaving. When we talk about generational wealth, what that actually means. The idea of someone being able to buy a house with an inheritance just like that is perfect. That's what we want to leave for our next generation, as opposed to leaving debts or even trying to leave funds without realizing that, if you don't set it up properly, you might actually still leave them out with debts. Okay, let's bring everybody back on. And hello, Robert. So happy to have you. Welcome. Thank you for joining
Hi, how
us
we
today.
doing?
Little technical, but we are good. I'm great. Thank you. How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing really well. I'm glad to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll come to you if that's okay, with the same question. So, what brought you here tonight? And if you can, before you answer that question, just give us a little intro as to who you are, please.
Yeah, my name is Robert Small. I'm the creator of the Legacy Poster. It's a poster that I create annually for Black History Month, but I also create other education material that's more Afrocentric, and I do speaking engagements during the month and throughout the year. And I'm really glad to be here. And I know that, Minnelle, that you have a great message with respect to legacy planning, and we met several about 2 years ago and everything like that. And I've been watching your live, and I'm just glad to be part of it. I feel like I've arrived now that I'm on your podcast.
I love that. I'm going to claim that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so as men, as fathers, let's talk about this uncomfortable conversation. And I will use my experience because I've been a funeral director in this industry for 20 years. Okay, so I've got some years in this game. And now when it comes to planning ahead, many times I'm with the wife who is making arrangements for herself and her partner. Or the husband is there, but he has been brought reluctantly, to say the least. Why is it so difficult for men to have these conversations? If you can help us understand, and then we're going to get into how to bridge that gap. So anyone can start who has a reason as to why. Robert, you're laughing. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a three-way conversation going on. Like the three of us are wondering who's going to brave that conversation first, right?
No, I don't know. I would say that maybe men are not as good at succession planning, or they're just too busy with the day-to-day run-ins of life, and so they don't get into it. And I think women are much stronger and bolder than men. Men, we think we are strong, but I think the women are stronger and in a lot of cases smarter.
I like it. Anybody else have a thought as to why it's so difficult?
I'll add to what John had mentioned, and so, but I think that it has nothing to do with like genders being like genetically, more educated or anything like that, because we know that that's not true. But the reality is, the one thing I would say is that women are more geared at a younger age to take on responsibility, right? So unfortunately, with men, like I always tell people that with men, unfortunately, that we have the option of growing up, but we're not pressed to grow up, right, and take on responsibility. So oftentimes, like with men, we have no like clear, we can avoid taking on responsibility, and that oftentimes that happens, and we haven't had like a constant prototype of what a man is, right? It's been a broken prototype because some of us have not had fathers in the house. So there's a gap in between that, and that child or son has to learn how to be a man by themselves or by osmosis around them. But for the females, they've had a consistent mother or mother figure in their lives, so they can emulate that. But if you don't have a father figure around, or if you had an uncle, like I got uncles and everything, and they were male figures, but they weren't taking on a fatherly role, right? They were taking on the uncle role, and I learned how to be a man from them, but not a father. I only learned the only prototype of a father that I had was my actual father, right? So consequently, like I'd always be the first one to say that having a father in the house, living with you 20 years every day, you learn things by osmosis by being around that person. You realize what you want to do and what you don't want to do. But if you don't have it, then you're kind of figuring it out for yourself, right?
So
To add to, can I add to
go
what
ahead,
Robert's saying
absolutely.
there? To
Yeah.
add to what Robert's saying, I agree that the way I grew up is my father and my mother, they split when I was 16, and you you're more taught to just survive. So the way I am, you're taught to survive for the moment. So meaning, provide for the family now. So you're never really thinking ahead unless you have somebody there
Mm.
to actually tell you, hey, you know what I mean? So through my experience of life, it wasn't until I read certain books and and I got certain people into my circle who were raised differently, right? Where I started realizing, you know what, there's more to this. And for me, I think I told you this, Minnelle. It wasn't until I started working at the LCBO, and as I was telling you, and I really understood what generational wealth was. And just a quick story, as I said to Minnelle. So sometimes when I'm at work, like I've been there a long time, so I'm at work and I just look at the bottles and read stuff, right? So I'm looking at this bottle, this Kettle One vodka, and I'm looking at the bottle, and I'm seeing the company might have started it in the 1600s, but what it's showing you, it's showing you the names of every son who took over, and there's like 10 sons. So I'm seeing this, and I'm like, this is crazy. So this is a family where they're set for forever, right? So it wasn't until I started seeing things like that where we have to kind of make the conscious effort to learn these things and then apply it into our lives, right? So that's where I'm coming from. Yeah. But
Yeah. Okay. So, Robert, based on what you're saying, and I guess they all kind of jive together. Now, as fathers, and you're thinking, I'm going to pass, right? And when I go, my family is going to be left. So, how, when it comes to wanting to provide for them, wanting to be that proper father figure, how does legacy planning factor in, or when does that kick in? Is it when you're expanded and you see a different experience, like Nana's saying, like something different? Now you're checking in, saying, okay, this is something I have to think about as well. Like when is that transition happen?
Well, it kind of happened with me more so because of how I grew up. But in addition to that, like with what I do, focusing on
Yeah.
history, like
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to avoid like focusing on the history of African Canadians and not thinking about your own history, right? And the last thing I said to myself many years ago, that I wouldn't want to have the acclaim of being the artist that created the poster that left his daughters penniless,
Yeah.
right? Because that would be almost like a comment on me that the acclaim was more so important than planning for my children's future, right? So I don't want that to be the end, but I would say that and to realize, overcome the stereotypes in our community, thinking that if you talk about a will, that somehow you're going to die
Yeah,
2 days
yeah,
later, right? You know,
definitely.
and if anything, it's a true testament to loving your family, because you want them to be happy no matter if you're alive or dead,
Mhm.
right? Not that you just want them to be happy while you're alive,
Mhm.
right? You know, it's like, hey, if I'm dead, I can't see it, so who cares, right?
Mhm.
You know, because you're basically, because unfortunately, when someone dies in your family, you know, if you don't have the money to bury them and they didn't plan for it, you're basically throwing a hand grenade into the next generation, a $30,000 hand grenade, if not more, into into your family's face, and that's their
Mhm.
lasting memory of you, right? At a time when they shouldn't be thinking about those things.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking now, sorry, John, I'm going to ask one question. It's going to help in the answer here. If we're speaking to, we have this platform, we have this moment now. We're speaking to men. How can we engage them in actually doing this, right?
Well,
And going beyond. Mhm.
I think just to pick up on a word that Robert said, and I have got it, in my mind here, I would start within the context of love and caring. So
Mhm.
to start the conversation, you say, hey, do you love and do you care for your family? Do you love and care for me? And so if the answer is yes, you know what? As he says, even after you die, would you have that same love and caring for me? And
Mhm.
so and if the answer is yes, okay, so let's sit down and let's plan about the situation. So my daughter, she reminds me every so often, and that's one of the reasons I'm here,
Mhm.
right? To say, hey, we got to get certain things done. We got to get certain things done. She doesn't want to go crazy trying to figure out a whole bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
So do it now rather than later.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, for myself, my thought process changed when I had my daughter,
Mhm.
right? But I've always been the type of person where I would always think before I do things, right? And I would always question things. And like, growing up in the Jane Finch area, you see certain things that I would look and I'd be like, man, this is something just wasn't adding up,
Mhm.
right? When I got into the workforce, and then I started seeing like how other communities are, the Italians, the Hungarians, the Russians. I said, oh, there's something going. There's a bigger game here, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then like my first thing, like I remember I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and as soon as I read that, I got into investing. And it's so funny that, and I notice in life, right? If you're not exposed to something, you don't see it. But once I read that book, and every now and then when I watch the news, and I'm like, oh, like it was always there. You see the ticker symbols down there, but you never paid attention to it
Yeah.
before because you didn't know what it was, right? And then going down that path led to me getting my accountant, who's black. He's great, by the way. But basically what I'm saying is when I started realizing certain things, the proper people started falling in place, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Knowing about life insurance. I knew nothing about life insurance before, right?
Mhm.
And I know a whole bunch, right? Knowing about life insurance, knowing about like I recently this year I started paying for my plot,
Mhm.
right? Like because like I said, I've seen, you know, people passing away, and those graves are expensive, right? But one thing I do want to say is one thing that I do with my circle is you just tell them, right? Like you you have to talk to your community. They only understand a certain language, and I
Mhm.
tell them, yo, guys, like, what's going on? Like, if you die, you're messed up. You know what I mean? And then like, what are you talking about? Then you have that conversation with them. So people are willing to learn, right? And I think now's the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also one
Mm.
more thing, especially with social media, there's so much information out there. We're bombarded with information, and you'll see these things, right? Like you'll see, like I see so many things online, and then once you do the research, you're like, oh, okay, so that's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, and you all have daughters, right? On behalf of the daughters, thank you.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, we have these conversations. And so, like, I'll talk about myself with my father. I, like, part of why I'm so passionate about this is I tried to have these conversations with him. And sometimes when you're talking to a older Caribbean man, we don't get as far as we would like. And so we're talking now about insurance, about investing, about generational wealth, but part of estate planning is also talking about what your wishes are for your health. Like what are your healthcare directives? And when it comes time to make a very important decision, do we know what to make? So have you guys had those conversations? Have you thought about that? Like if someone has to make a healthcare decision for you, do they know what to make? Yeah,
Well,
something to think about.
Yeah, no, I'd say that I haven't had that conversation as yet, right? I just been bridging over the concept of me dying to my kids, let alone that if I start talking about the health, that's more immediate type of thing. That could possibly happen tomorrow, right? Dying, hopefully 20 or 40 years from now, right? I think, but these are hard conversations to have. And the one thing I even mentioning to my daughter the other day, I said, hey, if anything happens to me, there's these 2 binders upstairs with your name on it. Go and get it if anything happens to me, right? And she went to me that, oh, you're talking about dying again, right? But I said, yeah, but you know what? If I pass away, the first thing you'll realize is that that you had a father that wasn't afraid of dying because he talked about it, right? It wasn't something that he was petrified by, and you'll learn to not treat death like as if it's something ominous that you have to avoid. It's coming for everybody, right? So that's one hard conversation that we have to have. And I don't think that if you're living a life that you're enjoying, then hey, you probably aren't afraid of death because you've lived a life that you fulfilled, right? So that's what we just need. But with respect to picking up on something that Sunset mentioned with respect to generational wealth, like that, I think that our community needs to know that you can either hand them generational wealth or you can hand them generational poverty, right? And a lot of our families are heading down generational poverty, right?
Yep.
Whether you're conscious of it or not. If you're not conscious of it, you're probably heading down generational poverty, right? By your actions or inactions or a combination of both, right? So picking up on what Sunset had mentioned about generational wealth and picking up on these type of conversations, these are the conversations that we need to have, because if we want to fight racism, a strategy that I think that everybody should have had, I mentioned this to you, Minnelle, that with respect to the Black community, if 25 years ago, or even 30 years ago, like 25% or 35% of the Black community took out a life insurance policy on their kids when they're one and paid $10 like per month for 20 years, like 30 years flash forward to now, like you have $100,000 or $200,000 to put towards a house.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? It's so funny you mentioned that. So my accountant, she my financial advisor, she put me on that. So she's the one who taught me about the pay to 100. And then she told me, she's like, Nada, this is what the Europeans, the Asians, this is what they're doing. As soon as their child is born, they're putting a life insurance policy on them. And from what I know, they can pull out a loan interest-free off of it. Am I right? Yeah. I knew nothing about it. I said, you got to tell me something once I'm doing it. So as soon as my daughter was born, 2 weeks later, I'm at the credit union. I'm like, I need this. Boom, got it, right? And I was like, I never knew these things were available. And then she's like, these are not the things we talk about in our community, right?
And we need to talk about it because fighting racism is futile, right? Because why are you going to spend your time trying to ask someone to change their mind about something? They've already made it up. What is within your ability is to do what they're doing. And all the other communities are not smarter than us. They're just being born into a culture that is already know what to do. And they're just riding off of that, right? But the reason why things are so hard for us is because we don't talk about these things to empower ourselves, right? And if we did, if 25% of our community own homes now compared to 5 or 6%, like we'd be on our way to being financially wealthy. And that 25% will start affecting the 75% that didn't, because that 75% last 25, hey, how did you get that? And you'll tell them proudly, right? So we need to create a culture where wealth is actually something that we prosper towards, rather than swallow the Bible whole and think that is somehow a negative thing if you have a lot of money, right? Because someone sold you that Bible. Someone sold you that Bible too, right?
So in other
It's
words,
another conversation.
I guess
You know where I'm going, Sunset, right?
we're
Go ahead,
saying,
John.
I'm gonna
we
keep
are
it toned for
saying,
this conversation. Go ahead.
we're saying, in other words, money talks and sometimes BS walks.
Mhm.
So money is an important part of life, although it's not the only thing.
Hmm.
Relationships are important, meaning not only with your loved ones, family, but general community. And I think what I'm hearing here, the education of the community with respect to acquiring and maintaining wealth is a very critical part of life. And so
Absolutely.
it is good to hear these things from younger brothers.
Mm.
Absolutely wonderful.
So I love the fact that you're saying all of this because one of the things I think is surprising is a lot of cultures for Christmas will give a plot, will give the fact that they've planned their funeral, that they've done these things. This is my Christmas gift to you. This isn't like it's inheritance being passed on. But that's something that I know for us, like it's a lot, there's a lot of fear when it comes to end of life. There's a lot of fear when it comes to planning or talking about it, right? If I talk about it, I'm gonna get dead, like there's a lot of that. So getting out of that mindset, let's get into that. Why not? Why couldn't that be a Christmas present rather than, an
Well,
iPhone or whatever it might be?
just a little quick
Wow.
one here to interject quickly. Many years ago, my wife and I bought a plot for about $525,
Mhm.
right? And
Rich.
this plot
Yeah.
is in a nice place, blah blah blah. Now it's probably 2000 or 20 something,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
So it's like real estate. You're
Hmm.
gonna die anyway, so you might as well buy the plot as soon as possible.
Hold on. Let me just interject because we do this all the time. We buy our cemeteries, and I talk about it too, buying your cemetery plot, but don't forget about the funeral. That's the part I do. The funeral plan, that first call, you can pre-plan that too. So there's two parts to doing your funeral, the cemetery and the funeral. Two parts. Okay, good.
Mhm.
All
Nice.
right. So I have a little clip. I want to play, and then I'd like for you gentlemen to give me some feedback on it, okay? Okay, let's see here.
This sound like a lot of questions which lead to the same thing. Just split whatever there's left evenly. I don't care. I'll be dead.
David.
Dad, Mr. Carter, I know what you mean. But the bank's gonna need an actual dollar amount so they can paint an accurate picture of your financial assets.
So, how big is the 401k?
I had to borrow against it to cover your mom's medical expenses. There's not much left.
Wait, what?
What happens if mom has another stroke?
I don't like this conversation.
We're out of tea. I don't know if we ever had any tea, but I'm gonna go to the store.
I promise you, Mr. Carter, nobody likes talking about money. And when you see your whole life on a piece of paper, it's sobering. I can't tell you how many of my clients I've seen open mouth sob because all they have to pass on is an old Nissan Sentra. Manual transmission. But we're professionals, and I've seen every scenario under the sun.
I just don't like seeing how little I have to leave my family. I worked 50 years and it feels like I've got nothing to show for it.
That is not true. Dad, you gave us love. And that's what's most important. All of this is just things.
And, it's never too late to start saving for your grandkids.
All right. Okay, so I love that clip because it was from Insecure, which is a really popular show, and I love that they brought up this topic. There's many different men in that clip with different personalities and different perceptions. So first, can we talk about how do we speak to our elders and help them to feel comfortable having these conversations with us? Because I know a lot of them feel as though they don't have enough to pass on or whatever that might be. Can we speak to that, please?
I'll go first. Well, okay. Speaking, I'm from Ghana, and speaking to I'm 1,000% sure it's the same with Caribbeans. African Ghanaian parents are stuck in their ways. They're not trying to hear it, right? And so for example, my daughter's 9, and she sees the world differently from me. So she might notice something and she'll say something, and I'll actually listen to her. Like she's got a point, right? If I try to do that, if we try to do that with my parents, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So there's that like this disconnect, right? As you can see from the clip, the father, he really wasn't trying to. It's more embarrassment, and as I said, we live day to day, but we're not thinking about the future. Whereas the newer generation, they're thinking about the future. So somehow we gotta make that connection, right? If anybody wants to add.
I sort of put it this way: the fruits of our labor, continue to provide nourishment for the families, right, and their livelihood, education for the children, blah 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 blah. So even though you may not be physical anymore, the legacy, apart from the training and the love that the lady mentioned, left something behind to pay the bills. And sometimes the only thing that's left is the insurance money, if the children know how to gain access to it.
Absolutely. That sharing, that part, John, is key. Sharing what is there, because for a lot of the families that go through this process, you're going through paper after paper after account, trying to find out what is still active, what had money on it, what was available, all of that. So having that clear for the family is absolutely key. Get that briefcase and organize it. And yeah, I think for me, like, I'm very passionate about our seniors, about empowering them. And like, Robert, you do legacy. Like, that is something that I think legacy, I think of you, I think of the posters, I think of those who have come before us. And I always want to remind our seniors that part of what you've done is arriving here, right? Is giving us this platform, is giving us this opportunity, and never to feel as though what you have done is not enough, because that has been put on us so many times that if there's anything we can do to empower our seniors, to uplift them and make them feel as though they are loved, supported, cared for, like everything, I think that's really important for us to do.
And also thinking, I think that one thing that our community doesn't do enough is to reflect on our lives and to think about what makes us happy, or how we can, what is going to provide for our youth or our family after we're passed away, right? And think forward thinking. So for me, like, obviously with doing the poster and everything like that, there's a part of me that's satisfied knowing that if I were to die tomorrow, that an essence of who I was will remain on people and school walls long after I'm dead, right? And my strategy was not just to get my children to buy in, but their children to buy in to feeling that they should do something for the Black community because their grandfather was Robert Small, right? And that poster that's up, that my grandfather's long dead, with his poster still there, and people bugging them, asking them what they're going to do, right? So that part I feel is already concrete, but the financial component is the icing on the cake to make sure that they have the resources to become whoever they want to be, right? And if they choose to do something similar to me, great. But if not, then they're on their way to be able to do something of their own, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, I think my daughter, my daughter goes to the Afrocentric school, and I think your posters are in there.
Yeah.
Right?
On the top floor, on both sides of the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a superstar, man. I should go meet you after, man. You're the superstar. But you know what? I will say something with that school, right? And I love it because even though, well, it's hate and love, because it's only half the school, but I will say that the teachers who are there now, they do care about the community, right? And so that's where it starts, right? So I could see with this next generation coming up, they're gonna know, because these teachers are having the conversations with them, right? One teacher in particular, Miss Wright, she's doing this. She has this thing called the right frame of mind. It's a foundation where she gives she pays for tutoring classes for kids and whatnot. But they're talking about these things at early ages, and I think that's where it begins, right? So it's pretty dope.
I like it. Okay, we're getting a lot of comments, a lot of encouragement, a lot of yeses to what we are saying, which is great. Definitely leaving a legacy of fulfillment, wanting to be cremated. Absolutely. Different options for whatever you choose. I have one thing before we start wrapping up here. In the video, you saw different men with different perspectives. There is the one with that, everybody has that strong, I'm gonna call it the strong uncle, the one who wants to talk about everything direct. How much do you have in the account? What's going on? Da 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 da. You have the avoidant, the one who was trying to go find tea. You have dad who's trying to avoid the conversation, and then somewhere in there you have the person who's trying to navigate this conversation. Can we speak to quickly? Can we speak to those different types? So I guess Nana, I'm going to give you the young one, the one avoiding, trying to run away and get tea.
Yeah.
How we can encourage them, bring them into the conversation. Robert, I think we talked about dad enough. I think that's okay. So then, Robert, I will give you the older brother who's speaking really directly and really harshly, and then John, I'll have you speak to how to navigate those two and bridge those gaps. Okay, so Nana, you have the most time.
Me first?
Yes.
Or him? Okay, well, for me, I was gonna say the young guy who was avoiding. That's where I'm coming from. That's my community. With them, the way you talk to us, you got to be straight with them, right? Mm-hmm. There's gonna have to be. And when I think back to when I was growing up, when I was 14, 15, it's true. There was always that one person in our crew who got it, right? And for me, it was my cousin Kofi's art. Now when I think about it, he had his mom and his dad there, right? So he got it, and he would talk, but we weren't listening, right? And I think life is the best experience. So a lot like with him, you just have to talk to him straight. But there's gonna come a point in his life where he's gonna realize that, oh, you know what? That's what it is. But you have to talk in a language that they know, right? The way they're sitting there talking, he's not trying to hear all that. He's like, whatever, I'm out of here. He's uncomfortable. He doesn't understand. He doesn't get it, right? But if his peers speak to him, he's more prone to listen, right? So there's gonna have to be somebody there who, same age, right? Same mindset, understands him and speaks him in that language for him to understand what to do next.
Robert, the straight talker.
Well, so it's so funny because being direct is kind of like my forte a little bit, right? So, if you haven't noticed that already, right? But I think that unfortunately, like even though I personally would describe myself as direct, it doesn't mean that I'm not quivering inside about what I'm about to say, right? Like I'm very hesitant about it, and I feel bad about bringing it up, but I realize that I do need to bring it up, right? So I think that the one thing that Black men have to do within their families is to push forward past their own emotional baggage that they might have, concerning the death of their feeling like as if they haven't accomplished many things. I think that's a problem that Black men have, men period have, because they're living in a society that measures them by how much they have, right? So they've went throughout their whole years like feeling like if I have to get this, I have to get that, like, hey, if I'm checking this girl, she's going to look at my car, she's going to look at my house, she's going to look at this, right? But I don't think that women wonders about if a guy wants her based on her car she drives, right? So needless to say, there's always this focus on material things with men, and I think that is like something that we have to push past, and not feel like as if it's a necessary component of who we are, and more so our characteristics are what we need to focus on, right?
Can I just say something before John responds? To add to what Robert's saying, it's very true, but the thing with that is, right, like especially this, like I look at my younger brother and cousins, and it's what they're exposed to, because what you're saying is 1,000% true, where we have this thing where what I want, what do I own? The best car, the shoes, right? But when you look at the media, the music, I say music is so powerful, and the images that you're seeing, that's what they're showing is I gotta have the best car, the flyest whip. You know what I mean? So it's hard, right? Because these young kids, they're not listening to the music that we were listening to growing up, right? When I was growing up, they were telling a story, and I knew they were telling a story. It wasn't that, right? But now music has been so institutionalized, it's crazy, right? So it's gonna be really hard to catch them, right? They gotta, it influences your thought process and what you think is real. It's kind of like, a lot of these guys think they're gonna make it to the NBA or whatever, right? But there's only like 500 players in the NBA. There's millions of us. Right? So let's be realistic. You know what I mean?
And meanwhile, they're 5'5" and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah, you know what I mean?
That's there too. John, you had one thing.
It's sort of difficult to get the two extremes together. However, I think you will have to find ways of letting people know the importance of pre-planning, but at the same talk, by the same time, I try to live by this little thing that I made up, but I don't think I made it up. But anyway, I say if it's important to do, it's urgent. So if you have something that you think it's important to do, then you make it an urgent activity. If it's not important, who cares? But if it's important, get it done. If it's important, it's urgent. That's the way I look at how I operate.
I like that. We'll take that. I'll take that as a clip and a sound bite for this live. Gentlemen, we are at the end. Let me ask you each the final question then. Part of your legacy and your estate planning is sharing your life story. So can you share, just because I think it would be nice, especially since Father's Day is around the corner, a story of a father figure, so it could be yours, it could be anybody, who has impacted you and how that happened. So any father figure who has impacted you, just share one story.
Okay, I'll go first. I actually have two quick. What is my father? He didn't give a damn. He came up here. He went to UFT, graduated with honors, was an architect. Was trying to get a job. In architecture, I guess in the 70s or whatever. Here wasn't happening. A lot of racism. He's like, the hell with this country. I'm going back home. Opened up his own firm, and he was okay. So he taught me. That's where I get my entrepreneurial spirit from, right? To just never stop. You know what I mean? Even if you try something and it doesn't work, you try something else, right? And then you just apply them. You're obviously not gonna make the same mistakes twice. That's one. Second person would be my teacher in high school, Mr. Foy. Mr. Foy was a Haitian. Mr. Foy. Right. Yeah, I went to West Eastern Centennial. He was a Haitian teacher, and he would always tell us. He'd be like, "Listen, I'm going to be harder on you guys because I want to prepare you guys for the world out there, because the world out there is not going to be friendly for you guys." And he'd tell us that all the time, and I never understood it until I got older, right? But he'd always say, like, he would always get at the black students, right? Because he's like, "Listen, I see the potential in you guys. Don't let, you know what I mean? These other teachers, they don't care about you guys. I care about you." You know what I mean? So those are two people for me that stood out.
I love that. Yes, for teachers as well, from the educator's daughter. So I love that.
Well, I'll just say, the teachers always come into the picture, of course. I had a teacher who believed in the ability of some of us, and to the point where we did mathematics exam a year before the typical time before the rest of the guy. He recognized there's potential in X amount of people. I'm going to push you guys, and you do the exam before the time and you pass. The other person was my father. I save money right now at the age that I am because my father, he was a tradesperson. He was a builder, mason, carpenter, etc. And I learned all of those skills from him, as well as my brother, my other two brothers. And as a result, I save money, right? So I know how to do typical things around the house. And there we go.
I like that. It's like,
yeah, well, I guess I'd have two people as well. One being obviously my own father, and he used to every time when I would come home from school, he would always have like the food prepared for lunch and everything, right? Like I didn't have to wait long by the time when I walked in the door at 11:35. So consequently, I was probably into my 20s until I found out that other black men didn't know how to cook, right? Really surprised, right?
Yes, yeah.
I just assumed that was the case. And when I would hear guys saying, "Yeah, I got my woman to cook for me," I go, "Yeah, but if she doesn't know how to cook, and you don't either, she doesn't cook well, and you could probably cook better than her. You're cooking stuff that you don't even like because it's some macho BS, right?" So it did make sense to me then, and still doesn't make sense to me now, right? But my father was, he passed away about over 2 years ago. but I still look at him and revere everything he was, because he did many things around the house and stuff like that, and provide a great example for me. But the example that he didn't provide, that wasn't able to provide within himself, that I found somewhere else, is, I would have to say, was seeing the life of Muhammad Ali, and like gaining momentum based upon learning about his life, seeing his victories, seeing him achieve when people didn't think he was going to achieve, and such like that. So there are many times a year I might see, watch a clip of Muhammad Ali and think that that's the guy that I want to be. That's someone that people respect, that would be direct, funny on occasion, right? And stuff like that. So there's a lot of attributes I took from him because I felt that, hey, to be like that guy is to be the greatest, right?
I love that. Oh, thank you for sharing. I'll share mine really quickly. So my father, growing up, I didn't realize, well, I knew that other friends were going to summer camps and having a good time. For us and for me, I went to summer school. I didn't know that people could have fun on summers, because for him, education was very important. So I had to keep going. So it was and not just education, but also being involved in the Black community. So I was a happy attendant of Higher Marks. If you guys remember Higher Marks, it was on Bathurst. Yep. So I attended Higher Marks. I would go to the Harry Jerome Awards. I would volunteer there. I was always attending Black community events, because he thought it was very important that I saw not just what we had at home, but that there were other Black people doing things in excellence as well. So that is something that I took from him and that I still enjoy doing. So there we go. Gentlemen, let me say it early and let me say it now. Happy Father's Day to you. I hope that you enjoy your days. Thank you for joining me. Thank you. You see the comments here. Thank you so much. This was a very powerful, informative, and I think important conversation that needs to continue. So wherever you are, please continue to have these conversations. This will be online. People can watch it, share it, and keep talking about these things. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you all. Everyone, take care. Good night.
Okay, good night. See you guys later. Okay, talk to you later.